Jax Miller stood in the center of the vibrating reactor core, ignoring the searing blue radiation to wrap his arms around a glowing child whose power was currently tearing the palace apart. The spire groaned, its ancient alloys screaming under the pressure of a 9-year-old's grief. Can a single human embrace really hold back the collapse of an empire? Stay with us to find out how a man with no powers became the most important person in the galaxy. The coffee in Jax's thermos had still been warm then, 6 days before the signal went dark and the palace turned into a gilded cage. High Arbiter Kale watched from the observation plinth, his multifaceted eyes twitching as he recorded the data stream. To the hegemony, humans were useful biological curiosities, sturdy, compliant, and remarkably good at scrubbing the plasma-fooled conduits of the apex spire. Jax Miller was the best of them, a scruffy man who moved through the immortal halls with a bucket and a quiet whistle. Kale noted that the humans seemed to lack the proper reverence for the ethereal throne. He treated the sovereign Alara not as a living god but as a particularly stressed employer. Then came the day the nursery was breached. It was a minor mechanical failure in the atmospheric seal, or so the logs initially suggested. In reality, the young ward Lyra had simply been lonely. She had wandered into the maintenance sublevels, her crystalline skin dimming with a sickness no ethereal medic could diagnose. Kale observed the human janitor encounter her near the waste reclamation unit. Jax didn't kneel. He didn't recite the lithic hymns. Instead, he sat on a crate of industrial solvent and reached into his tool belt. He pulled out a Captain Spark Gap plush toy, its fabric scorched and its internal plasma coil leaking a dull, dangerous orange. The human didn't use a nanowelder. He used a bent spoon to tuck the stuffing back in and a strip of silver duct tape to seal the leak. Kale's sensors recorded a spike in Lyra's bioresonance, not of power, but of peace. She called him father. The word was a biological impossibility, a linguistic error that should have been purged. Yet, as Jax handed the repaired toy back to her, the girl's glow stabilized into a soft, healthy amber. The universe is often indifferent to our logic, and sometimes the most sophisticated systems fail where a simple gesture succeeds. It is a reminder that complexity isn't always a requirement for profound impact. The peace lasted until the sky turned the color of bruised plums. The iron-bound warlords didn't send a diplomat. They sent a boarding party of gravity maces and neural shredders. Their target was the nursery. They wanted the child born of starlight and ancient ritual, but they hadn't accounted for the man who smelled of engine grease and old sandwiches. As the palace vibrated under the first volley of the assault, Kale saw Lyra's eyes turn a blinding, violent white. Fear, sharp and primal, ignited her untapped genetic potential. She didn't fly toward the guards. She fled deeper into the station, toward the one place where the noise of the battle couldn't reach. Her, the heart of the reactor. The heat in the reactor core was not merely thermal. It was a screaming pressure of the mind. Lyra crouched at the center of the primary coil, her small frame pulsing with a rhythmic, violent light that matched the spire's death rattle. And now, in the center of that searing blue radiation, Jax Miller didn't look like a hero. He looked like a tired man who had seen enough broken things for one lifetime. He stepped past the melting safety rails, his boots smoking, and simply reached out. The sovereign Alara watched through the emergency feed, her hands trembling as the human pulled the glowing child into a crushing, soot-stained hug. He didn't use a containment field. He didn't use psionic dampers. He just leaned his forehead against hers and whispered into the storm. "I've got you, kiddo," he said, his voice straining against the roar. "I'm right here. Dad's here." Kale, observing from the secure bunker, saw the impossible. The radiation didn't subside. It shifted. It moved from a jagged, destructive frequency to a low, resonant hum. The child's light didn't go out. It softened, flowing into the human, and then back out into the palace's circuitry. Jax didn't reach for a weapon to fight the iron-bound fleet looming outside. He reached for a heavy-duty wrench and that same roll of silver duct tape. With a grunt, he bypassed the traditional pulse emitters, jury-rigging a manual override directly into the reactor's resonance chamber. He wasn't calculating an explosion. He was tuning a broadcast. When the pulse finally hit, it wasn't a wave of fire. It was a golden ripple that washed over the iron-bound ships, a frequency of pure, paternal protection so intense it paralyzed their neural networks. The warships didn't burn, they simply stopped, their crews weeping from a sudden, overwhelming sense of belonging they couldn't name. The battle ended without a single casualty, but the hegemony's laws were older than the stars. High Arbiter Kale stood in the aftermath, his stylus hovering over the digital tablet as he read the final judgment. The human had saved them, but he had also contaminated the royal lineage with common emotion. "The human must be banished," Kale announced, his voice echoing in the silent throne room. "The biological law is sacred." Sovereign Alara didn't argue. She simply stepped down from the plinth, removed her crown, and placed it on the empty seat. She walked to the human who was still holding the sleeping child and took his hand. "Then we go," she said. "The spire remains, a cold monument to an immortal rule, but the heart of the hegemony is elsewhere now. On the verdant delta, in a house that smells of pine and engine oil, a man sits on a porch and repairs a toy with a bent spoon. He doesn't look like a legend. He just looks like a father, a soft chime. The air in the garden rippled, and a small silver pod touched down among the flowers. A young girl stepped out, her eyes glowing with a familiar starlight. She clutched a Captain Spark Gap plush toy, its fabric worn and its duct tape peeling, and looked up at the man who had started it all. The legacy of the janitor was only just beginning. This story was a tribute to the unseen heroes who fix what the world breaks. If you've ever felt like a small part of a big machine, come back tomorrow. We've got more tales where the underdog wins.